Hello everyone and welcome back to SFF180. I'm back today with something I haven't done in a while, an editorial video. Let's just say it's been a while since I've had a real reason to get a good rant on, but don't worry, today I've got about 100 reasons. In every artistic field, lists have become a kind of currency. Top 10 lists, top 20, top 50, top 100, best of lists. Their popularity is evergreen. I suppose this has to do with the average person's desire to outsource their effort in discovering great works of art. That's completely reasonable. Most of us in this mad world drudge away our days trying to earn enough biomass to keep ourselves and our families alive. And so for someone else to take the time to catalog our entertainment options is really appreciated. So lists do serve a valid function. People can pore over IMDb and Box Office Mojo's weekly roundups to find out what movies everyone's going to see. The Spotify and Apple Music charts let you know what music everyone's into. And book lovers love their own lists, so we can all put our TBRs together with minimum headache. But at what point do lists try to do too much? At what point do they stop being helpful and create more argument and debate as opposed to offering guidance? I suppose that threshold can only be decided by each of us as individuals, but for my own part, I would say that any list that tries to prescribe what is true for all time is definitely pushing that boundary. And I say this as a critic, which is a vocation where you're forever being expected to offer your own best of this and top 10 that lists. The biggest problem with all-time lists is that either you run the risk of simply recanonizing the same battle-hardened classics everyone is sick to death of hearing about year after year, or you reshuffle the canon to be inclusive of more recent and diverse works, thereby inevitably irritating those who feel that, like them or not, the classics are still the classics, and their influence can't go unacknowledged. Rolling Stone's solution was simply to make their list of all-time best albums bigger, expanding it to 500 entries, under the premise that a canon doesn't necessarily have to kick anyone out, but it does have to grow. When Time magazine recently asked a group of fantasy authors from diverse backgrounds to assemble a list of the 100 best fantasy books of all time, I believe they made a noble but unsuccessful attempt to split the difference, honoring both new and old works, but in a way that shortchanges everyone and fails to spread the acclaim fairly or accurately. And it reinforces my own opinion that best of all time lists should not exist at all. Because I couldn't resist, I poked my head into r/fantasy just to see what people were saying about this. I noticed most people describing the list as interesting. For those of you who may not be fully versed in the subtle complexities of conveying emotion through written English, interesting is an adjective people use when what they're actually saying is, what the fuck is this shit? First, let's consider the source. We get more lists than we can handle from Goodreads or Reddit, but Time magazine isn't exactly the platform from which you'd expect to see a list of 100 canonical fantasy novels. Mainstream corporate media outlets validating the literary artistry of fantasy in unequivocal terms still seems to be something that gets fandom flipping out with excitement, though it really shouldn't be all that exciting. It's been a long time since either fantasy or science fiction was mocked as childish escapism for basement-dwelling neckbeards, and we don't need to react to a list from Time magazine as if we're the pimply nerd in 9th grade who's blushing from head to toe because the unattainable hot cheerleader unexpectedly smiled and said hi to us in the cafeteria. Okay, maybe that's not what people are feeling at all. It's natural to be excited by recognition, and the individual authors whose works appear on this list should, by all means, bask in the joy. But it's been the omissions, the books and authors who are conspicuous by their absence, that have driven more of the conversation here. The first question on just about everyone's lips when this list was published was, where's Robin Hobb? But this was by no means the list's only or even its most egregious omission. The list was assembled as follows. We began in 2019 by recruiting a panel of leading fantasy authors: Tomi Adeyemi, Cassandra Clare, Diana Gabaldon, Neil Gaiman, Marlon James, N.K. Jemisin, George R.R. Martin, and Saba Tahir, to join Time staff in nominating the top books of the genre. Panelists did not nominate their own works. The group then rated 250 nominees on a scale, and using their responses, Time created a ranking. Finally, Time editors considered each finalist based on key factors, including originality, ambition, artistry, critical and popular reception, and influence on the fantasy genre and literature more broadly. Note that parenthetical there. Panelists did not nominate their own works. Okay, good policy for avoiding the appearance of conflict of interest. And yet we immediately notice that every single one of the judges has, at a minimum, one of their books included, and in some cases, two. So apparently the rule about not nominating your own work did not extend to not nominating each other's. Or was it the editors of Time who chose to pack their list with the works of their own judges, maybe as a gesture of thanks? We really have no way of knowing. Either way, the optics aren't good, especially when set against the enormous roster of writers spanning decades of fantasy publishing who simply are not here. This is a difficult and sticky problem because it's clearly true that some of the judges have written books that deserve inclusion. Others not so much. I'd agree. You cannot talk about important works in fantasy publishing without including at least one book each from N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy and George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. One way the list might have avoided this sketchy business would have been to have not authors, but other people in the field, editors, academics, journalists, critics, even bloggers, judge the selected books. But this, I fear, is where corporate media's fixation on celebrity culture comes in. Time magazine knows that its readers know who Neil Gaiman and George R.R. Martin and Diana Gabaldon are. They don't know who a bunch of obscure eggheads are. So the celebrity of the judges is a selling point for Time, even though it results in the awkward spectacle of a bunch of writers appearing to tell everyone that they've written some of the greatest books ever in the genre's history. Kinda cringe. But beyond all of that is the strange chronological skewing of the choices overall, which gives someone new to reading fantasy no actual sense of the genre's vast and storied history, nor any pattern to follow in order to comprehend its artistic evolution. Out of 100 books, all except one, or possibly 2 to 3, are English-language works. Fully 43 of the 100 were published since the year 2010. Of those, 27, over a quarter of the list, were published in the last 5 years, and 2 were published this year, in 2020. And one of those is a book that has been out, as of this recording, fewer than 2 months. As good as that book may be, it is absurdly impossible to claim that it can have had, quote, influence on the fantasy genre and literature more broadly in such a short time. To take this list at face value, you would have to accept the ludicrous notion that for over a century, the entire fantasy genre produced virtually no books of lasting literary value, until about 10 years ago, when suddenly we were inundated with masterworks. Entire careers of some of the most revered authors in the field are simply erased, by the dozens. The 1940s, a decade which saw such prominent novels as Mervyn Peake's Titus Groan, John Myers' Silverlock, Fletcher Pratt's The Well of the Unicorn, and Fritz Leiber's Conjure Wife, are completely ignored unless you want to count one of the 4 books that make up T.H. White's The Once and Future King, which is included. And the 30-year stretch comprising the entirety of the 1950s to the 1970s is represented by 24 books total. Andre Norton, a woman whose more than 100 novels were so important to the development of children's fantasy that SFF180 named their YA award after her, is relegated to non-existence. The 1980s get 6 books, 2 of which are by Diana Wynne Jones, utterly ignoring such renowned titles as Gene Wolfe's The Shadow of the Torturer, Tad Williams' The Dragonbone Chair, Robert Holdstock's Smithigo Wood, Elizabeth Lynn's Chronicles of Tornor trilogy, the first fantasy trilogy to feature an openly gay protagonist in a relationship, and Emma Bull's War for the Oaks, a book that's credited with pretty much launching the entire subgenre of urban fantasy. The list's criteria for inclusion seems even more incoherent when you notice that each of the 3 volumes of The Lord of the Rings, which really is just one novel published in 3 parts, get their own listing, while T.H. White's The Once and Future King, which is actually a bind-up of 4 books, gets one. The great Terry Pratchett, whose 40 volumes of the Discworld series were incalculably popular and influential, is only represented by 1 title, and that's The We Free Men, an odd choice from among his YA-oriented Tiffany Aching stories, when fans of Discworld might understandably be baffled as to why far more acclaimed titles like Small Gods, or Nightwatch, or Going Postal weren't chosen instead. And yeah, 1 Terry Pratchett novel on the list next to 2 novels by 1 judge and 2 by another judge? Yeah, I'm side-eyeing the heck out of that. So you get the idea. As a list that purports to honor books from throughout the entire history of the genre, going all the way back, believe it or not, to Le Morte d'Arthur and Arabian Nights. I mean, shit. Just go ahead and add The Odyssey and A Christmas Carol. This whole thing is a total mess and a botch and an embarrassing farce. But given the bias towards newer works, it's clear what kind of list Time should have published. A list that I would be infinitely more supportive of and excited to promote, if only for reasons that it's more honest. It seems clear that some of the judges saw this list as an opportunity to give their friends and colleagues a boost. So why didn't Time simply publish a list called 100 Exciting New Fantasy Novels by Diverse Authors, expressly dedicated to showcasing newer writers from a wide spectrum of backgrounds who are bringing new stories and new perspectives to the field of fantasy? This would have given an entire generation of new talent some worthy exposure in mainstream media. But because words mean things, the problem with naming the list 100 Best Fantasy Novels of All Time implies that these are all stories that have stood the test of time, that have history of their own, and more importantly, that have left their mark of influence upon other works. What we actually have is an awkward and clumsy mishmash that might just more accurately be titled 57 Old Fantasy Books and 43 New Ones. The way Time has attempted to mash together both old and new here has ended up disrespecting and even disappearing more of the legacy of fantasy fiction than it has honored. Here's a thought. At the end of the day, the only best of list that should matter to you, my dear viewers, is the one in your head. Why not share that list with everyone here? Fill the comments with the top 10 or 20 or 50 fantasy novels that have had the greatest impact on your life. We could all probably do a much more commendable job of introducing each other to great new books, old books, whatever books, than Time magazine has done, even if we don't have the seductive sway of corporate media. Okay, everybody, you guys know the drill. Light up those comments. Oh boy, I expect the comments for this one to light up. And if you enjoyed watching, please hit the like button. Share the video far and wide with all of your SFF reading friends, and above all, please subscribe if you have not done so. That is how the channel grows. We are on the way to 9,000 and then 10,000. Thank you all. You can also support the channel at my TeePublic store and at my Patreon, where recruits into Wink's Army get little perks like getting to see some of my videos early access. I want to thank all of those lovely people from the bottom of my heart for their additional support. It's greatly appreciated. The Patreon money goes to pay Matt Olson, my wonderfully talented channel artist who does all of the gorgeous and unique thumbnails for my channel. So thank you for that. I want to thank all the rest of you for being the very best viewers in all of BookTube, and until I see all of you next time, stay safe, stay healthy, don't take any cheap wooden best of lists, and happy reading.